let me go ahead and introduce our first reader. All right, so Hallie Koontz is a lifelong Geneva native who works as a freelance writer and editor. Alongside her writing career, she performs on the award-winning fiction podcast Quest Friends as washed-up reporter Sparky Malarkey, or as her friends refer to the character Hallie's Future. She has been published in literary magazine The MacGuffin and was recently a finalist in the 2024 New York City Midnight 100-Word Microfiction Challenge. This year she is launching her own writing contest, Jerboa Lit, with her friend and business partner, David Simonchek, who is also reading tonight. And you can find out more about this endeavor at jerboalit.com. And they've got some information over at their table, and I'm sure they would love to talk to you about it. I asked each of the writers if there was an author or book that they were really kind of excited about right now and wanted to share. And she said there was two books from the 1960s that she is reading right now, or that she has just read. One is called The Quaker, the other The Heretic by Liam McIlvaney, is that right? What she said. So, all right. So please welcome Hallie to the mic. Thanks.
Hi, I want to thank WaterStreetStudios for having me. My bio mentioned our writing contest, Jerboa Lit. Both of the stories I'm going to read tonight were written based on another contest that gives you 48 hours to write a story of a certain length based on a random prompt that usually includes a genre, a location, and then an item or an action. So both of these stories were just given to me, and then I wrote them based on what I was given. So this first one is called Mr. Crow, and the prompt was a Western in a pumpkin patch with the word crown somewhere in here. I was harvesting a pumpkin when the stranger came. He stood at the edge of the patch, silhouette like that of a scarecrow in the setting sun, and actually I thought he was our scarecrow at first because of how the smooth shadow of his hat blended perfectly into the one from our scarecrow's crown. I nearly screamed when he said hello. He held up his arms. "Hey now," he said, laughing. "Sorry to give you a fright." I laughed too, hoping to hide my embarrassment with some good-natured self-deprecation. "That you did, mister. What can I do you for?" The man glanced at the scarecrow. "Guess you thought I was this feller?" Sure did. I was still doing my best to collect myself. "There's something I can help you with?" The man finally put his hands down, hooking them into either side of his belt. "I'm just looking for directions. Or rather, I'm looking for someone." He angled away from the scarecrow to look me straight in the eye. "Milo Carver. You hereabouts?" I stood up from my crouch, slowly. "You got business with Milo Carver?" "He hereabouts?" the man repeated. "Guess it depends who's looking." The man looked back at the scarecrow. "You can call me Mr. Crow." There was good-natured humor in it, but still, I was uneasy. "All right, Mr. Crow," I said. "Milo's got a house on the main street, blue with red shutters. Can't miss it." He nodded his thanks and walked away, but stopped immediately after his back was turned. I'd made sure the click of my gun was loud enough for him to hear. He moved his head forward, in the direction I couldn't see, in something like a nod. "You've got me turned around, so I'm on the back foot here. But if I turn to face you, we going to do this sportsman-like?" "Depends what you do when you turn around." He did turn around then, making sure his hands were up again before fully facing me. "Now, son, I don't know what Milo Carver is to you, but I sure know he ain't worth this kind of trouble." "I could say the same to you." He raised an eyebrow. "What exactly do you think I'm going to do to Carver?" "I know you're outfitted like a gunslinger," I said, looking up and down at the clothes he was wearing and that I'd love to have. "And gunslingers are only good at one thing." He grunted. "That why you're challenging one?" I was the one to raise my eyebrows this time. He had a point, but I didn't think he'd be able to see my hand shaking, not from that distance and with the sun this low. The shadow of the scarecrow loomed between us, larger with each second. "Think of it as less of a challenge and more of an interview," I said. "An interview," he repeated. "An interview," I re-repeated. "So as if you tell me what you want." Then he let his hands flop to his sides, and I panicked. My pa always told me to keep a cool head if I was ever holding a gun, a loaded one at that, and I'd promised him I would. It was an easy promise for someone who'd never held a gun in a real situation before, who'd only ever practiced aiming at scarecrows and pumpkins and cans, and it was an easy promise to break when you weren't aiming at those things anymore. The shot rang out clear as a shadow, which is to say, muddled and unformed. I felt more than heard it, a strength I didn't possess, thrown back at me in the recoil, the speed of the decision hurtling toward the stranger faster than I realized I'd made it. It wasn't direct, but it was a hit, and the man reeled, away from the scarecrow's shadow and into his own stretched out on the ground. He hissed but didn't say anything, didn't swear or cry out or cuss, and although his hand flew up to the wound, he didn't linger on it, didn't poke at it or cover it with his hand to stop the blood from flowing. He simply took a deep breath, then a second, and then he stood, taking a third breath once he was on his feet. The gun wavered in my hand. Now listen here, the second shot rang out much clearer, fast and sharp as the haze of the sun mid-set. I joined my own shadow on the ground then, but not because I'd been hit. His bullet had landed by my feet, and the surprise of it knocked me off them. "Boy," the stranger said, reloading his gun to replace the bullet he'd used, "I don't know whether to teach you a lesson for shooting at me or to give you pointers so it's a cleaner shot next time." I didn't reply. I was busy gulping air, needing more than the man had needed when my bullet actually made contact. "You're young," the man continued, walking toward me. "You don't need a stranger's death on your conscience. Not for the likes of Milo Carver. But you don't need a stranger's ire neither." He rolled his shoulder and hissed again. "If you hold a gun and you ain't aiming to kill, which you shouldn't, not at your age, you best be prepared to shoot someplace that won't give a feller a reason to shoot back. You just gotta scare him. Best way to get what you want without consequences you ain't prepared for." He'd reached me by then. "Now, Milo Carver, your pa." He held out his hand. I didn't take it. "How'd you know? Your pocket watch." He nodded to where the watch had fallen out of my vest pocket, jarred loose from the shallow scoop of fabric with the fall. "That's Milo's. Matter of fact, used to be mine." My hand flew, but jerkily awkward, still shaking, to the watch on the ground, covering the silver possessively like I could mark it with the sweat coming off my palm. "That's a lie." "I can see why you'd think that." The man stretched his hand out farther, but I still didn't take it. "I take it your pa told you it's a family heirloom?" I looked up at him. "Always told me someone would come looking for him someday. I can't..." The man nodded like he was agreeing, a forceful nod that cut me off more effectively than words. "I understand, son, but you can either take me to him or you can stay here and let me find him on my own. Let the chips fall where they may." He stretched his hand out farther. He'd known then which choice I'd make. My second story was also written based on a prompt, and that prompt was fairy tale, pond, apple juice. This is called The Sweetness That Makes Life Worth Living. Deep in the forest there is an orchard, and deep in the orchard there is a pond, and deep in the pond there is a body. The forest and the orchard and the pond were there from the start. A miracle to the settlers was that little glade, and they drank the water and ate the fruit and took the seeds so they could plant more trees, begin new orchards closer to home. They planned to multiply their yield, to ensure food for generations to come. And that season they worked and they planted and they succeeded. And that is why you and I are here now, child. But they didn't know about the witch. And that is also why we are here, sharing this story, and why you must listen. When the witch returned from her journeys through the wilds she claimed as her own to the orchard she claimed as well, she was furious, and she demanded the apples be returned. "But that is impossible," the village cried. "The apples we haven't eaten we have planted, and to return them now would be to return them as sprouts, as seeds. It would mean to rip them from the ground and to sentence us to death." "Then so be it," said the witch, and that is why they killed her. The pond wasn't very wide, but it was deep, deep enough to sink a body weighed down with rocks, and deep enough that, looking down from the surface, all you could see of it trapped at the bottom was the hair floating up from the top of her head, swaying in the water like foliage in the wind. Over time her hair became greener and fuller and heavier until it did turn to foliage, and people forgot the tree at the bottom of the pond had ever been a body. They forgot, child, but you must not. When the apple tree grew at the bottom of the pond, that's when the water changed, when it turned from blue to amber, when its ripples turned to waves of sweet foam that rolled and swayed and pushed sugar into the air. The smell was, and still is, and forever will be, intoxicating. The kind of sweetness that makes life worth living, and the children brought ladles and buckets and goblets to drink the juice by the pintful there in that sugared glade beneath the apple trees, where they'd fall asleep with their bellies quenched and their bodies spent. And the orchard flourished too, with new trees sprouting up at the bottom of the pond each time one of those children disappeared. You must never drink from the pond, child. The apples never grow far from that tree, and it's not just her blood you're drinking. Thank you.